Wonder if you could just describe for folks what your experience overall on the clinical trial was. I mean, I think focusing both on really kind of the positive aspects of it, but also any
Mhm.
kind of like what your perceptions of maybe what the downsides might be from participating in the clinical trial.
With regards to my experience in the clinical trial, after I had signed all the information and the consent forms, we started the clinical trials unit at the Mayo Clinic is a separate location. You have your own nurse when you get your infusions. And so for the first day, the first time that you actually get the drug, everything goes extremely slow because they don't infuse the medication as fast, just to make sure you don't have a adverse reaction. And so the first couple days of the clinical trial enrollment, you're at the clinic, and the infusion takes a lot longer than it normally was, just because they want to monitor you. The nurses are constantly in your room watching you, checking your temperature, checking your blood pressure. It's a very controlled environment with regards to the first time, and actually throughout the whole clinical trial, because at any point you could have an adverse reaction and they want to be there to monitor it. So with regards to that, my infusions were once every week for the first 4 weeks, and then after that it was going to be every 3 weeks. So the first week was intense. You went in one day for blood tests to make sure that all your labs looked good, and then the next day you went and had your infusion, and then you had to stay after the infusion was done. You had to stay for a certain amount of time to make sure that you wouldn't have any adverse reaction. So my first day of the infusion, I was a little bit apprehensive and scared, because this was a first in human clinical trial, so it had never been tested in humans other than the participants that were currently enrolled. So it was a little nerve-wracking as far as not knowing exactly how my body would respond. But again, the nurses were there to have medication for me if I needed it, if I had an adverse allergic reaction. And we did some pre-meds as well before the infusion to make sure that we could control that possibility as well. So after that first infusion and the first 4 weeks of infusions, I responded great. I didn't have any adverse reactions. My main side effects to begin with were just fatigue, and that was really it. As the time went on, the side effects started to build, just because the increased recurrence of the medication. So, as I said, I went in every 3 weeks. It was um, the procedure was labs, meet with the oncologist, discuss your lab results, how I was feeling, the side effects that I was experiencing. And one of the things that they give you is a tracking sheet for all the side effects that you are experiencing, because that data will be critical for how they report the results for the clinical trial. So I had to track um, everything with regards to, even if it maybe didn't apply, I tracked it just to make sure that they knew that that was happening with myself. So with regards to that, infusions, again, they were every 3 weeks. It took about, I'd say 5 to 6 hours from start to finish. And I would usually, stay overnight the night before, because we had to be there early in the morning in order to get the infusion started. So there was a little bit of travel with regards to that. And, I was willing to do that because I knew the benefit could be substantial. So, and then, like I said, every 6 weeks I had to have scans to see how the medication was, or my body was responding to the medication. And, that is one drawback, I would say, of a clinical trial, is that you are getting scanned a lot. And I know, just the impact of radiation and, scans might concern some people, but I also felt assured that my oncologist and the clinical trial coordinator was really on top of what was happening in my body. So, there's drawbacks because you're getting contrast every 6 weeks and you're, subjected to these tests and procedures. But at the same time, you feel reassured that you know exactly what's happening in your body at that time. So luckily, I was able to participate in this clinical trial for almost a year, and my body had a complete response to this medication. So it was great news. The problem that I encountered with my clinical trial was I was on one specific arm that didn't have a drug that penetrated the blood-brain barrier. And so eventually I developed brain mets. So at that point, I had to withdraw from the clinical trial. And that was a tough thing for me because I had such a great response in the body and I didn't want to leave this clinical trial. So I actually appealed to the drug company, and my clinical trial coordinator appealed and asked them if we could take care of the brain metastasis with Gamma Knife and then continue on the clinical trial. And that was another experience that I kind of learned, is that just because you have an adverse event and it may automatically, exclude you from the clinical trial, to challenge that. Because again, like, especially with these first in human clinical trials, and with the advancements in science, I mean, my brain mets were taken care of with Gamma Knife, and I had such a good response. So the drug company actually approved me to stay on the clinical trial, but unfortunately, a couple months later, we saw progression in my chest, and so we decided to move off the clinical trial in its entirety. So, and that drug right now has been approved, and I feel that I've been, a part of that story. And I think that's really impactful. And the fact that I got a year out of it with relatively minimal side effects. My side effects weren't terrible. It was fatigue. I had some nail issues, which is common in my EGFR mutation. I had some skin issues and some rashes, but for the most part, it was very tolerable. So as far as the ending of the clinical trial, and this is something that I think in the future, could be improved upon for the patient experience, is that I definitely felt a little bit, I don't want to say ghosted, but kind of ghosted after the end of the clinical trial, because you are given such a high level of care with a clinical trial, as far as, meeting with your oncologist every few weeks, every 3 weeks, really, and having scans every 6 weeks, and talking to your coordinator on a weekly basis. And then all of a sudden I was off a trial and I went back to my regular standard of care engagement. And it was like, where is everyone? So I think that was a really tough realization for me. Like, okay, I had just had a year of really intense observation, and now it's gone. And so that was a little bit of an adjustment for me, because I felt, I was used to the intense care, and it really wasn't explained to me that would all stop, even though my logical mind knew that it would stop. I think, I was just so used to it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can view that as both a positive and a negative, right? The amount of, as you said, it's sort of intense and you're doing a lot of visits and things like that. But on the other hand, people are really watching out for you. So I think it's both a positive and a negative about clinical trials, and it's just part of it.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing, you were on the trial for quite a long time, that you probably became relatively close to the study team and those people that were really involved in your care. And so that can be hard to when you kind of go, are now no longer in that same team, whatever, that same environment. Exactly.